عليكم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن نبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها المسلمون الله حق تقاته لا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Faiz Muhammad. I'm a development specialist and mental health advocate, and I've been fortunate enough to be chosen as the moderator for this panel today, in which we will be discussing the scourge of rape within our society and the various ways in which we can tackle it. It was our beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam that said in a Sahih hadith that the example of the believers in their affection, mercy, and compassion for one another is that of a single body. And when one limb aches, the whole body reacts with sleeplessness and fever. And I thought to quote this hadith so it may serve as a reminder that we cannot expect one part of our community will suffer either openly or in silence without the entire community eventually feeling the effects and consequences of this suffering. When dealing with issues as sensitive and as critical as rape and sexual violence in our community, it is important that we all be gracious with one another. I pray that this conversation serves as a beginning to hopefully many more productive talks and actions within the community with regards to this issue. Without further ado, let me introduce my panelists. First, we have Mr. Nurudeen Lemu, the Director of Research and Training at the Dawah Institute of Nigeria, the Islamic Education Trust in Menace. He develops, facilitates, and conducts train-the-trainer courses in enhancing interfaith dialogue and engagement, intrafaith cooperation, and promoting faith-based critical thinking. He's a director of several organizations, including Lotus Capital, the Development Initiative of West Africa, and a co-founder of Interfaith Activity and Partnerships for Peace. He holds various positions on a number of other organizations and focuses on issues relating to social welfare, government policy, education, sustainable development, youth empowerment, and gender equity. Mr. Lemu has trained and given talks to students, lecturers, youth, and community leaders in over 30 countries, and he has moderated, presented, and produced more than 200 radio and television programs. He is a fellow of Aspen Leadership Institute and a member of Aspen Global Leadership, Colorado, a fellow of the King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz International Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue, and of the Africa Leadership Initiative. He holds an MSc in Resource Management from Edinburgh University and a bachelor's degree in Agriculture from Hauwa Bello University, Zaria. His personal motto is growth and contribution with compassion, wisdom, faith, and fun. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We also have Dr. Hauwa Bello. She holds a BSc in Human Anatomy from the prestigious University of Ilorin, Kwara State. She has a master's in health psychology from Walden University, Minnesota, and is currently a PhD student in that same university. Her research interests are stigma related to mental health and the concept of shame in the African community. She is a mental health advocate, a certified neuro-linguistic practitioner, a trainer par excellence, and a CBT psychotherapist. She's passionate about helping people move from where they are to where they want to be. She's a speaker, writer, and advocate of human rights, a member of both the American and Nigerian Psychological Association. Dr. Hauwa will be joining us shortly. We also have with us Hajiya Fatimah Hamza, passionate educationalist who specializes in both teacher training and nurturing the spirit and intellect of children. She served as a Commissioner for Women Affairs and Social Development in Jigawa State between 2002 and 2007, and is a founding trustee of Al-Amana Foundation, currently the school head of Al-Amana Academy in Kaduna, and she's the founder and CEO of Palm of Hope Foundation, an organization that serves to connect people with knowledge and ideas that empower and support other humanitarian organizations in their activities. Thank you very much for joining us today, Hajiya Fatimah. It's a pleasure to have you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.
All right, so let us just start immediately. Hopefully, Hajiya will be able to join us shortly. Yeah, Sheikh, to start off, how does the Sharia define rape? And does it make any distinction between rape and molestation?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Your question is, I know it sounds simple, but it's loaded. Firstly, how does Sharia define rape? When we say what is the position of Sharia, one meaning is what is God's position? How did the Prophet present this? However, there are many crimes and offenses that are treated under categories where the Quran and Sunnah have not come out specifically on a particular issue. And so it is left to the ijtihad, to the juristic reasoning of scholars to classify the offense. So because the Quran and Sunnah, in the view of most scholars, is not explicit on the subject of rape, the scholars have differed on how to classify it. Some look at it as similar to zina, which is consensual extramarital sex. Others look at it as more similar to hiraba, which is robbery or forceful seizure of somebody else's private property. So because of that, you have had differing opinions. The other thing, when you say what is Sharia's opinion on something, Sharia's position on things change with time and context. Sharia remains flexible through customs and contexts. And so even in English, when you said what was rape 100 years ago, it was a man raping a woman. Today, however, when you look at rape, and this is also the opinion of many contemporary scholars, because on topics like this, it is the views of contemporary scholars that are most respected. Why? These are the scholars who see the situation. These are the scholars who see the case at hand. So while it is useful to learn from scholars of the past, where the Quran and Sunnah is not explicit, scholars are not bound, contemporary scholars are not bound by the opinions of a particular scholar. What they are bound by is the Quran, Sunnah, and the methodology of ijtihad. So on the area of qiyas, the contemporary scholars consider rape as a major sin. I mean, this is also in the past. They have broadened the understanding, and some scholars of the past also had this view that rape is forceful sexual penetration, irrespective of whether it is a man with a woman with a man with a man, a woman with a woman, whether it is vaginal, whether it is anal, whether it is putting the private part, insertion of the private part, or insertion of any other object, whether a bottle, whether a weapon, which is seen in various war crimes. So the definition of rape is broader for contemporary Muslim scholars, and they tend to look at it more as hiraba, in other words, a violent crime, and not similar to sex. And so is it similar to molestation? Not exactly. This is what you call the worst form. You can have other forms of taunting and sexual harassment, but then rape is what you call the worst form of that. Wallahu alam.
Now, you mentioned that there are differences in classification between the scholars regarding whether it is a subcategory of zina or whether it is classified as hiraba. Could you clarify some of these issues for us?
Islamic law classifies punishments into three broad categories, and I'll try and make this brief. So one group of punishments belong to what they call qisas, what you'd call equitable retribution, symbolically represented by an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But of course, you would normally it's financial compensation through diya. So that's one category. No scholar classifies rape under that, but just good to know. The second category is the hudud. Hudud are those crimes with specific types of punishments prescribed by the Quran or by the Sunnah. In the case of hudud, you have those, and rape is not unique here. You have other things that some scholars put under hudud, others say no, it's not under hudud, it's under ta'zir, which is the third one, which I will come to. So in the case of hudud, you have prescribed punishments, like theft has a prescribed punishment of amputation in the Quran. Zina in the Quran has a prescribed punishment for the unmarried, that is of 100 lashes, etc. So you would find that category. One thing about hudud is there is no forgiveness of the offense once it comes to the judge, once it comes to the representative of the public. Hudud, the judge has limited flexibility regarding what to do there. Under hudud, you have zina, but under hudud, you have hiraba. So hiraba was traditionally highway robbery or brigandage or armed robbery. However, attached to that would be war crimes, terrorism, assassination, those type of things that create major insecurity in the land. And then the last category of crimes are the ta'zir, which is left to the discretion of the judge. Now, in the case of ta'zir, it's everything that is not qisas and that is not hudud falls under ta'zir. Ta'zir, the judge is left to decide what punishment they feel appropriate. Warning to something as severe as death sentence in the views of the Maliki school and also Ibn Taymiyyah and a couple of others. So on the issue to do with rape, because the topic of rape, also called iktisab by some scholars, because rape has not been treated by the Quran and the Sunnah with a prescribed punishment, some then decide where should it belong. They all agree it's serious. So some say it is because it is sexual, they do qiyas, which is reasoning by analogy, to say then it is similar to zina. The problem with that is that once you say it's zina, then the maximum punishment for zina is 100 lashes. Some would add banishment for a year, which sounds like imprisonment in the contemporary context. If you say it is married, then it would be death sentence by stoning. The problem with that qiyas, however, when it comes to rape is zina is a crime, an offense that Sharia is not keen to prosecute. So when you look at the nature of zina, when people came to the Prophet and confessed zina, the Prophet tried to not listen to them. On cases that were reported, he would even ask, why didn't you leave it alone? And so what we see in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet and the Sahaba was they were reluctant to prosecute the offenses of zina. And so when you look at the nature of the evidence for zina, you need 4 people of integrity that witness the act. The offense of zina is not, what you call the legal offense of zina, is not that zina took place between a man and a woman. That's not the big issue. No. In Sharia, the big issue is that it was brought public. Either brought to a public notary, like the judge, or it was committed in the presence of up to 4 decent people. Definition of public there, meaning in the presence of up to 4 decent people of integrity. If you did zina in the presence of 3 people, it's not public enough to be taken. In fact, if you bring it to the court, the 3 people would be lashed. So the problem by saying it is similar to zina is some scholars, not all, then insisting it must have 4 witnesses. And the nature of rape is we want to prosecute. It's not like zina where we actually want to protect the dignity of those involved. So because of the differences between rape and zina, the other thing I should say is in the case of hiraba and other crimes, forensic evidence is acceptable. In the case of zina, remember, we do not actually want to accept any witness other than 4 eyewitnesses or a repeated confession that gives no shadow of doubt. So when scholars say rape is like zina, the problem they then go into is extending the analogy and then requiring the raped victim to produce 4 witnesses. Okay, you can't produce 4 witnesses. Some of the Maliki scholars, for example, Ibn Qasim, Sahnun, would say, okay, maybe 1 or 2 witnesses. But the thing is, most rape is done where there are no witnesses. And the only way to hook the person is to go with forensic evidence. But forensic evidence is not acceptable. Cameras, DNA testing, all of these are not acceptable in zina, which is why many contemporary scholars recognize the fact that they all agree that with the change in situation comes change in fatwa or in change in hukum. And scholars of the past did not have the luxury of forensic evidence to help them in prosecution. So it was really your word for another person's word, and they felt safer with that. And this is not just Muslim law. Across the world, there was difficulty there. So to conclude, most contemporary scholars have felt comfortable with, and this is not purely contemporary, Ibn Hazm, one of the very old scholars of the Zahiri, who is not comfortable with qiyas, felt that the crime of rape can be and should be handled as hiraba, similar to robbery, similar to a violent crime. In fact, one of the early scholars said, a woman would prefer to be robbed of her property than to be robbed of her dignity. And so if the offense of rape is logically more serious than the offense of zina, then it should have a greater punishment, which is why many feel more comfortable putting it under hiraba than under ta'zir. I hope that doesn't just add to confusion.
No, it doesn't. Thank you very much, actually. Hajiya Hauwa, are you online? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. I have a question for you. When we speak about the prevention of rape, we often do so using guidelines of lower your gaze, separation of genders, and modest dress codes. Would you say that these things alone can serve as preventative measures against rape?
Okay, Alhamdulillah for Islam. So to just jump right into answering the question, I would say that that's not enough.
No.
Aside from individual perspective of, trying to protect yourself, trying to follow the ethics, like you have said, lowering your gaze, trying to cover up and all that, the community too has to do its own part. And that's where laws come into place. Just like Sheikh Lemu was explaining, there has to be like severe punishment attached, such that when people know that if they eventually cross that line, there is, a repercussion. So the rule in terms of punishment is also very important to be in place. The fact that there are people who also stand up for you, it's also in the community aspect. So apart from individual, there should also be community deterrence to stop people from actually committing the sin, because we are not individualistic, we are community based. So if people know that, okay, because from examples, some of the examples we've heard, people have done all these things. They lower their gaze, they use their hijab, or for children, for example, children less than 10, what else would you expect that those children would do, that they haven't ordinarily done? Yet, they were still molested. So we need to go more than the individual taking responsibility, but the community too has to take responsibility. The family has to take responsibility, and then the society at large too has to take responsibility. So it's not only individual. That alone is not enough. It has to go all around, complete circle.
Now, one of the conventional things that you will hear people say when it comes to rape victims is that they will be blamed for what they are wearing or blamed for where they were at a certain time.
Yeah.
Do you feel that this affects their ability to heal from the trauma and cope with what it is they're going through?
You mean when people blame them for
yes, when
how
people
they were
blame
dressed?
them for, yes, exactly.
Yes, it does. It does. You know, it goes back to the fact that we live in communities. When individuals know that at the end of the day, they will still be blamed for whatever happened, it does affect their psychological health. And then he also puts something that is very, very significant, which is guilt. They continue to blame themselves for whatever has happened, even though at the end of the day, they are not supposed to be blamed. But the guilt will eat them, you know, so deeply that at the end of the day, you see them coming down with a lot of psychological and mental health issues. So definitely that would bring on a whole lot of issues for the individual. It's like you are, you know, in our parlance, in Nigerian parlance, we'll say that you are rubbing pepper on top of a wound. You know, you are making the person feel bad already. And that's why most times people don't even come out to say that is what happened to them, because they know that at the end of the day, when they come out, they will still be blamed for whatever happened. And then they will guilt trip them. And at the end of the day, instead of actually, you know, trying to go on the attacker, you go on the victim. And at the end of the day, the attacker goes scot-free, the victim remains psychologically broken down for the rest of his or her life.
Now, Hajiya Fatimah, are you online? Can you hear us? Hello? Hello? Okay, there seems to be a slight break in connection. Hajiya, well, let me ask you, since we have determined that it really doesn't have to do with what a victim was wearing or where they are at a particular time, what is it that causes acts of rape? In the mind of a rapist, what is it that causes them to commit such an act in the first place?
Oh, that's a big question. It's a whole lot. It's multidimensional. A whole lot. This may be gory, but let's look at it from the angle of a small child. Okay? Some people do these, like of recent, we'll be hearing it about ritual. People rape because they want to use them for ritual. Now, what's the mindset of whoever is doing that? A whole lot is ongoing. And then I'm sure we also have heard that abuse people abuse people. So when people have been abused, they want to abuse themselves. So that's another issue. Then people who have personality disorders, people who want, they want control. And the only way they can be in control is to, you know, rape individuals. We have people, but one thing I want us to know actually is that most of the people who do this, if not all, are actually sick. In fact, all of them are sick in one form or the other. Psychologically sick, physically sick, they are sick. So it's not a normal human being will not do that to a normal human being. They are definitely sick somehow, you know, one way or the other. However, why I said almost all and not all is there's a small percentage that are not necessarily sick, but however, they do it out of curiosity. And that's for when children do over children. So you've seen a 10-year-old doing over a 5-year-old, or a 12-year-old doing over a 6-year-old. For this, at that time, we'll say that it's out of curiosity. It's out of the fact that they've seen so many, you know, bad things out there, and they want to practicalize what they've seen. Unfortunately, these acts also affect the person that it's being done on, whether it's a 5-year-old or the 6-year-old or the 7-year-old. You know, at the end of the day, maybe, I don't know if that will come up, you know, some of the psychological effects that happens to rape victims, maybe we want to address that. So what happens is that even though this is an act of curiosity, no, I just wanted to know what it feels like, because children are usually very, very curious. But for adults on children, that is not curiosity. That is far more than curiosity. That's now, the person is now psychologically, you know, sick. Something is wrong somewhere, you know, and most times you discover that they say that they didn't do it intentionally. Some of them say they didn't do it intentionally. However, at the point of the time that they were doing it, something was definitely wrong. So it's very wild. And it's sometimes some of them would do well with treatment, but sometimes some of them just have to leave the society because they are so I don't want to use the word bad, but they are so, the mentality is so destroyed that leaving them in the community with people is like sitting on, a keg of gunpowder. So it's really wide. It's really, really huge. It's something that for different people, different triggers, different reasons behind what they do.
All right, so I just want to catch on to one thing that you said earlier, because what I'm getting from your explanation is that it really has nothing to do with the rapist being unable to control their urges. It has nothing to do with sexual desire, so to speak.
No, sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it has to do with sexual desire. Okay, for example, sometimes some individuals have seen, some ladies and they want to talk to them, but they don't know how to, goes back to personality disorder. And then they feel that the only way they can take control is to rape the victim. So for some, it's actually that. But for some, it's more than that. It's far more than that. So that's why we can't just conclude that this is what happened in this particular case. There has to be assessment done. There is a whole lot of things that go into it. That's why we say that it's not only the survivor that should seek treatment, even the perpetrator should seek treatment. So why would someone do that to another person? Something is definitely wrong somewhere. So what's wrong? Then psychological testing and assessment will bring that out.
All right, thank you very much. Sheikh, there are obligations within Islam that are incumbent upon the entirety. Hello, Sheikh, can you hear us? Yes, there are obligations within Islam that are incumbent upon the entirety of the Ummah, referred to as Fard Kifaya. Would it be accurate to say that the support of victims, their protection from harm, and prosecuting anyone accused of rape is a Fard Kifaya obligation on the Ummah?
Absolutely. Like all legal cases, if you do not have qualified people as judges, if you don't have qualified people prosecuting financial crimes, domestic, legal offenses, civil cases, society would go into anarchy. And so, simple answer to your question, yes, it is a fardu kifaya for us to, as a community, ensure that in the whole chain, both in the prevention, the management, and the cure of problems such as rape, we have competent people managing it. And of course, as the doctor has made clear, this is not just something for lawyers. We need medical personnel who are good in it. We need lawyers who can handle, law enforcement agencies and individuals who can handle forensic evidence. Part of the problem is when you take the case to court, you do not have enough evidence that can convince the judge. And so the judge does not want to give the harshest punishment, whether it's death sentence or life imprisonment, if he or she has a question mark regarding the evidence. So the quality of evidence is critical, and this is an area where, as a society, we don't have adequate rape kits, nor do we have adequate trained people. We have individuals who, the moment there's a rape case, they take it to the police. The police, unfortunately, can delay before the case goes to a competent doctor who can actually get the kind of evidence required. Exactly. But then how many doctors do we have? And you go into another problem. But simple answer, it is a fardu kifaya. We must take it as important as we take the need for doctors in other areas, law enforcement, and people in agriculture.
Okay, thank you, Sheikh. Dr. Hauwa, one of the barriers that most victims face is that their attacker is more than likely to be someone that they know, a relative, a teacher, a neighbor. and this will make it difficult for them to come forward. What is someone to do if they find themselves in such a situation?
Yeah, you're very right that most of the people who are molested are being molested by people that they know. In fact, less than 10% are by strangers. So more than 90% are either family members or friends and loved ones. However, I always say that when we keep quiet and we don't do anything about it, what we have done is that we have allowed the wrong to go unpunished, and then we have allowed the victim to remain perpetually, in that state for the rest of his or her life. So regardless of whether the person is a family member or not, I say that we should advocate that this should be reported, because what research has shown is that once the person starts, the person doesn't stop. So when the person does with one, he goes to the next, he goes to the next, and he continues like that until he leaves family members and then goes outside. So do we want to destroy 5, 6, 7, 8 people's life, or we nip it in the bud from the first one and make sure that it doesn't go past that? What would we rather do? Cover it up in the family and let it fester, or do something about it immediately, get the person help if it is help that is needed, or get the person punished if that is the way to go. So rather than, let's look at, I'm not a sheikh anyway, but then look at the Prophet ﷺ when the issue of the cutting of hand came in. And he said, even if he was his daughter, Fatimah, he would do the same. So how dear was Fatimah to the Rasul ﷺ, yet he said that. So how dear is our family member to us that will say that they've done something wrong, and rather than make sure that if, face the consequences of their action, we are trying to cover up. The truth of the matter is both of them will not live normal lives. Someone who rapes someone is not living a normal life, and the person who is raped will not live a normal life. So why do we want to go back to normal? There is no normal after that. There is no normal. So we can't go back to normal. So rather than cover it up and say, okay, let everything go well, is your father, is your, is your uncle, is your auntie, hey, let's do the right thing. Because at the end of the day, whether we don't do the right thing here or not, we'll still have to be called to account on the day of Yom Al-Qiyamah. And I think that one, it would even be the worst one. So it's better we, whatever it is, try to make sure that we do the right thing here on earth, regardless of who is involved. I know it's difficult. I know it's not easy. But by the time we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people do it, you see people will begin to, the fear. Let me say maybe the fear or something will make other people prevent or stop themselves from doing it. So it's important that regardless of who is involved, we have to do the right thing.
That's true. Thank you very much, Hamza. Staying within this topic of danger that is close by within the family, I want to segue to a question for you, ya Sheikh. Does the concept of marital rape, that is rape between spouses, exist within Islamic jurisprudence?
Simple answer, yes, it does, but they don't call it that. No. If you say rape, it is usually somebody who, the moment you say somebody has been raped, it automatically is, you assume that this is not your marital partner. And what gives the challenge for many scholars is the fact that part of the rights of marriage is that the wife has a right to sexual relation and the husband has a right to sexual relation. And whereas somebody you're not married to does not have those rights. The question then is, because you have a right, does that mean you can take it without the permission of the other? Can a wife just sell her husband's property just because she's married to him and she has a right to be taken care of? So they would all say, no, that is wrong. So usually if you present it to some and you say marital rape, they look at it as an oxymoron. This is a contradiction in terms. If, however, you define rape instead of using the word rape, and you say, is it acceptable for a man, could be a woman, But is it acceptable for a man to forcefully have sexual relations with his wife against her will? They would all tell you no. Why? Because of so many teachings of what marriage is about in the Quran and in the Sunnah. Firstly, the general premise, what they call, the Prophet says, La darar wa la dirar, don't cause harm, nor should you reciprocate harm. You can't use the umbrella of marriage to do something to your wife which she finds even more painful than slapping her. Slapping her is already haram. Hitting her in any violent way is already haram. But forced sexual intercourse, if I don't use the word rape, without consent is even worse to her. So definitely that would be haram. If you put it as a violent crime, and this is why the classification is important. If you say rape is similar to zina, then the scholar also gets a bit problematic. How can you say zina within marriage? Whereas if you say rape is more like a violent crime, then everybody understands, yes, a violent crime, a son can steal and sell property. It doesn't make it legitimate because you are the son. So the relationship doesn't belittle that it is haram. What would be the appropriate punishment is left to the judge, of course, to decide. But regarding what Islam expects, the Quran describes men and women in marriage as being like garments of each other. Antum libasun lahunna, hunna libasun lakum. They are like garments, protecting friends, awliya of each other. The objective of marriage is mawadda wa rahma wa sakina, of love and compassion and tranquility. Nothing that accommodates something like forceful sexual relations. So the default position in Sharia is that the asl, the default assumption is that harm is haram. And so if you are causing harm to anyone, the default is it is haram. You have to justify it. That, okay, it was to remove a harm or whatever. So in the case of marriage, absolutely unacceptable. And it could be, depending on her, a basis for divorce if she wants.
Thank you very much. Hajiya Fatimah, can you hear me? Are you online?
Yes, I am.
Yes, salaam alaikum. I wanted to ask you, as an educationalist, what do you feel are some of the most common misconceptions that people have around the topic of rape and sexual violence?
Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله أجمعين. My bad. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
At this morning, distinguished panelists, thank you very much for inviting me. Wow. So misconceptions, actually, there are so many, but honestly, as an educator, interacting closely with children, I see some very disturbing behaviors that tells me that this child is exposed to some form of indecency. And sometimes this leads to conversations with parents. Parents just sit down and just say, but it is always, how did that happen? They don't go anywhere, they hardly mix, and basically entering that denial bubble. So it is always like, it's not happening to me, it's not happening to my children. It's something, I know that I keep them safe, and so on and so forth. So speaking to many school owners, they experience the same as well, because sometimes even worse than what I experienced in my school. So we are looking for answers basically in the wrong places. Most of the time, the culprit is right under our noses, our house helps. Our house helps being our nannies, our drivers, our gate men, our security guard, molesting our young boys, molesting the girls. A lot of the times, all the siblings in the home are watching inappropriate content, and the younger siblings sneak in to become audiences in that daily occurrence, and it goes unnoticed. The parents are not there. This saddens me very deeply, and I want to be really a part of this solution. So it's very important that people understand that rape is a heinous crime. It's a crime against humanity. It's an epitome of disrespect. honor, of dishonor. You know, it's a breach of trust and it's an evil act against the victim, but also perpetrated by a human with a sick, diseased heart. Now, this is very important. I think it was Hajiya that mentioned this earlier. The person, the perpetrator, is sick, has a diseased heart. And by diseased heart, I mean spiritual disease. It has become a full-blown pandemic because it went unchecked. We are battle souls. You know, a great fitna has before. We need to understand that. It was a journey getting to where we are. And it started from somewhere. It is a systemic conditioning that every level, at every, the male is taught to be dominant, that he's king. They belong, you know, they think the women belong to us, and they're under us, they're there to serve us. We can do as we please and get away with it. So we need to attack that system that gives rise to this problem. We have to remove that Fir'aun, as they call it, from the very, very young age. This sense of entitlement boys have. And to stop this cycle coming around, our approach at the very beginning, giving our children the tools to protect themselves and to guard themselves against this evil of becoming potential victims, as well as potential perpetrators. We must feed their soul of displeasing Allah, feed them with goodness, wholesomeness, with love and compassion, you know, respect for humanity, basically catching them young, so that when they grow up, the good Shakila will take over. Now, our approach as educators must always seek to address the roots, you know, plant better seeds so that the children will have firmer roots in the Quran and Sunnah. And then we reap the good fruit, inshallah. Whatever we do, we must always ask ourselves, does it check the behavior? This work must begin at the home and in the school. We have to clear their paths of any impediments, honestly, and fortify these institutions that give them this tarbiyah. So absentee parenting, you know, it's a big, big problem. It all starts from the home. Most of the time when rape happens, usually a trusted person, like Hajiya mentioned, who is the perpetrator, in trusted people into the home, where it is supposed to be safe for the safe space for the children. I have a problem, really, honestly, with parents that have nonchalant attitude. Parents, you know, many parents have this attitude. Parental attitude is very abysmal, honestly. It's a big problem. Parents are not present physically, they're not present emotionally. The house helps are the hands that are rocking the cradle. You leave the caring to the nannies, to the drivers, you know. There are a couple of times that I've seen, you know, drivers coming in to drop older children and then having the younger children with them sitting on their laps, and he's at the gate waiting for these children with small children, men surrounded by men, little children surrounded by men. Where are the parents in this? You know, you make them easy targets for the predators, because you're honestly are our children, while both of us are busy. We're busying ourselves with something. But honestly, parenting is a big number one job. This is what, you know, parents need to understand. It's the big number one job. But we as parents are busy, being overwhelmed, occupied with other jobs, you know. So the meshing of parental roles, who is watching over the children? Parents are not on the same page. The mother and the father are not on the same page on this tarbiyah. So where the children act out, you know, in between those pages, you know, is where the children act out their script. You know, they play you both. I've had instances where in school, you know, parents come in and maybe the mother comes in and is fighting with the teacher. And then when they go back home, the mother says one thing and the father says another. And when the child comes into school, he would tell you that the father has allowed him or the mother has allowed him, whereas the father or the mother has not. So they're not on the same page. And in between, this is where the children play us all, you know. And many times the fathers leave school matters, discipline matters to the mother. You know, he just believes his job is to pay fees, that's all. So when there's a disciplinary issue, you know, they don't want to hear about it. And so, you know, they're surprised. And then it's always the mother. You must have done something, whereas you left it to her. Then another problem is eroded value system. You know, we have long crossed those lines. Who is the parent? Who are the children? And we all know that children see with their eyes. Hear with their eyes. Children hear with their eyes. And, parents are no longer role models for their children. They're incapable of effective parenting because they themselves do not know any better. I once heard a quote that someone said, the hardest job children face today is good manners without seeing any. This is a big problem. Parents are not role models, and we are expecting our children to behave with good manners. Many parents do not even know how to have crucial conversations with their children. They are afraid and shut down their children when they ask important questions. Well, if you don't, trust me, they're going to go to somebody you don't want them to go to. And that vacuum will be filled with undesirable elements. So if you're lucky, they ask the right people, else I leave that to your imagination. So we don't know who their friends are. We don't talk to them. Someone rightly quoted that sometimes we are so angry we transfer aggression into the child. And the thick of it all is in the rural areas. The rural areas. Let me ask this forum that please, whatever we do, we must carry the rural areas along. Because they're the ones bedeviled with this problem. Children that are supposed to be in school are hawking on the streets. And this is where a lot of the problem happens. Once I was in Gumel when I was working as a commissioner, and I happened to be parked under a tree. And I noticed a girl was sitting right in front of, two men. And she was kneeling down with a tray and they were gisting. We were there for like 30 minutes and she was there like 20 minutes of the time. And when she was about to go, I took it upon myself to call her and begin to ask her things, and say, what were you doing there? Are you not supposed to be in school? She kept quiet. And underneath her tray, I had to raise, just to lift the cloth on her tray. And what did I find there? There were condoms there. And there was a lot of money there. Can you imagine this? So we need to look at that. Then tarbiyah issues. Boys are raised differently from girls. We all know this. The nuance is that boys are kings. They do no wrong. Their bad behavior comes with the territory, they say. I see it all the time. A couple of parents have told me they prefer to bring girls to my school and boys elsewhere. And then I ask, why? And they say, to harden them, to make them boys. That's what they say. Here we're into tarbiyah, but there the boys will be hardened and toughened, so that make them into boys. What does that mean? I have seen the way some boys address girls on the sports field, sometimes with disdain. So it's what they see. We have to unlearn this culture and relearn, a new culture and respect honor. Many families are still not separating sleeping rooms. Children, boys and girls, grown-ups are still sleeping in the same rooms. You find that boys are not respecting girls' spaces at home, and you hear the girls talk about it, the children talk about it. And then, at that, the social media are the new parents on the block. So where are the parents? Not present. Then we also have a problem with educational content. We need to go back to, fixing our curriculum in schools. We have to fix the curriculum in schools and bring back morality into the classroom. Now, today we have allowed secularism to take our classrooms, to take over our classrooms. So education today hardly teaches about morals, about God. It's mainly about how to make money. It tells you your net worth is about how much money or the kind of job you're able to land. So your net worth is in terms of money, not in terms of your, So it's also in terms of individualism, about me, and me. It's about dominance, it's about power, So instead of the net worth being about your character, instead of building and strengthening the family unit, instead of the community, instead of the children going out there helping others, being beneficial in the community. And then finally, I would like to add that pornography. Pornography is a big problem today, whether we like it or not. We're going about as if there's nothing wrong, but it is a huge problem. I have not conducted studies. I know maybe many have, but honestly, my instincts tell me that the rampant tragic nature of these rape incidences is tied closely to watching too much porn. Well, it's too late. Our children are already exposed to this poison. It is in our homes, through your screens. Yes, the TVs that we buy without is coming into this, the devices that we buy, all that is coming through that. 76% of watching porn is on the mobile phone. And today, most of the kids have 1, 2 mobile phones, you know? Many are addicted to porn today, and chances are it started way back in the childhood. It thrives because it's cheap, it is accessible, it is anonymous. Billions of websites today. Last year, 42 billion visits. The year before, 38 billion. So any guess what this year's statistics will be? You know, 70% of the users are male and 30% of porn users are female. So once you're hooked, your brain craves for more and more and more. And because the dose is no longer potent, one begins to crave for harder stuff, venturing into more bizarre areas. So I won't be surprised. That's why we have more and more boys today being raped. You know, it's changing. They're moving from girls now and moving on to boys. 1 in 10 porn users under the age of 10. 1 in 10 porn users are under the age of 10. Can you imagine that? Age 10 to 14 make up 36% of the unwitting category. The average age of first internet porn exposure is years, 11 years. I leave that to your imagination, honestly. So I'll allow the others to talk. I've said a lot, you know, and then we'll just say more in the course of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Hajiya. Dr. Hauwa, I wanted to ask, what are some of the psychological reactions that can come about as a result of rape? And are there any physical changes that accompany them as well?
Okay, Alhamdulillah. The psychological reactions are quite a lot. And perhaps maybe before we even go to the psychological, maybe we'll also address the physical or join the two together. Aftermath of when a woman is raped or when a man is raped, fortunately, research shows that it's almost the same for male and female. The first thing is that, of course, there's a likelihood that the person can have UTI, that's urinary tract infection. And then there's a likelihood that the person can also have sexually transmitted diseases like HIV/AIDS, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and all that. There's also the likelihood that the person would have uterine fibroid if the person is a female. So this is one of the long-term consequences of having been raped, that's having fibroid. And then another thing is that when it's a female, there's also the likelihood that she would have painful intercourse in future. When she's married, there's a tendency of having what we call frigidity. She tends to, you know, don't want it. And then there's a likelihood that, you know, it's going to be painful. And then, of course, there's also the tendency that the woman can get pregnant. And if she's pregnant, you know, there's a whole lot of other things that happens with that. And then aside from STIs and the UTIs, there are other infections too that can happen, bacterial infections and other kind of infections that the person could have. Along with that is laceration, especially when the person is younger, like children. There's a likelihood that the child will have laceration, even if it's adult, you know, because it's forced, is not done in a way that it's normal. So there's a likelihood that the person will have lacerations. And then immediately with this, psychological issues that could happen is that the person has what we call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This is when the person has a whole lot of things, you know, the person has flashback, the person has nightmares, the person can't stand to remember whatever has happened. They try to avoid triggers, you know, it runs them, you know, what we almost going bonkers. And then we have distrust. The person is likely to distrust, if it's a male that did it on a female, the female is likely to distrust males, the male gender generally. And if it's a female to male too, the person is likely to have that distrust. And then apart from that, the person is likely to have low self-esteem. I've had people wherein, you know, when it becomes so constant, they begin to see themselves as sexual subjects, and they believe that God has created them, you know, to become sexual toys for people. And then they have sleep disorders. They are able to sleep well. So they have insomnia. It's either they sleep too much or sleep too less, or they sleep and they're easily startled. You know, a whole lot of things, issues that has to do with sleep. And then another thing is that they are likely to be depressed. They are likely to be depressed. And then this depression is likely to be clinical. That's what we call the major depressive disorder. So they get really, really depressed. And then they are likely to have anxiety issues, what we call anxiety disorder. They fear and worry about everything and anything. They are easily startled. Things happen and then, you know, they just go and nuts. They are likely to have what we call panic attacks. So everything is going on fine. They just get a little trigger. They go, you know, their heart begins to beat. They are sweaty and shaky. There's AC on and you see the person is sweating and also their heart is pounding, you know, all that. So they are likely to have panic attacks. And then they are likely to have problems with future relationships. So you'll notice that most of them never have a good relationship, either with friends or with partners. So they'll have problem in marriages. They have problem with friends generally. They have problems in life because they are not able to have good relationship. And then they have communication problems. They are unable to communicate well because, you know, at the heart of human existence is relationship. At the heart of human existence is the social life. And when that has problem, it's likely that the person has problem with communication. They lack self-esteem, just like I've said, and they have self-efficacy. Their self-efficacy is very low. So they believe, when we say their self-efficacy is very low, it means that they believe that they can't do something. So even what ordinarily people think they can do, they will believe that they can't do it. It's all in the mind. And then they have what we eating disorders. So it's either they become anorexic because they also have weight issues. With either they have too much weight or too less weight, so they have weight issues. And they have eating disorders, bulimia, anorexia, you know, binge eating. They eat, someone eats so much and then goes to the toilet and then throw it all off. And, you know, a whole lot of things around eating disorders. And then because of this, they also have issues with that obesity, because when they eat too much, they're likely to add on weight, and then losing this weight is quite difficult. Perhaps let me give us an example. This one was very, very surprising. You know, when Dr. Felati, the one who came with the adverse childhood experience research, one of the things that actually triggered him to go into that adverse childhood experience research.
Hello? Oh dear. Hello, Dr. Hauwa, can you hear us? Hello? Oh dear, it seems that we've lost the connection. She's gone offline. Yeah, Sheikh, let me direct a question to you in the meantime before we get back to her. In our communities, we put a lot of emphasis on the concepts of hilwa, privacy and modesty. And oftentimes this is conflated with the assumption that it's immodest to speak about issues of sexual violence or rape. And this can also prevent victims from coming forward. What is the Sharia perspective on this? Is a victim obligated to report an instance of sexual violence? And once they do, how is the community supposed to react?
Okay, assalamu alaikum. When it comes to issues of injustice and a person is a victim of injustice, that individual, the victim, has the choice to pursue the case or to forgive the victim. Everybody else who sees something wrong should correct it with their hand or with their tongue or with whatever capacity they at their disposal. The Quran makes it clear when it comes to issues to do with injustice, we have no tolerance. It is the victim. The Prophet ﷺ is reported by Anas, reported that the Prophet ﷺ would forgive any wrong done to him, but not injustice or wrong to others. And so the moment we find somebody is a helpless victim of injustice, of oppression, of rape, or any other form of injustice, the Quran requires us to stand for justice, even if it's against our own family members. And as Sister Fatimah mentioned, this is a very common source of rape situations, that a lot of rape is actually done within the home environment by cousins, by uncles, by step-parents. So when it comes to justice, we stand for justice against anybody. So this issue of family honor, this is rubbish when it comes to a rape victim. When it comes to what will people say, that is where we also have to act. But what will Allah say? When you see a victim, you stand for the victim and whatever is going to happen. Otherwise, if we don't have people who will sacrifice their reputation for justice, then it all goes hush-hush and we don't have an environment where this thing is handled. Rape is the most unreported violent crime in society. Depends on the study. In Nigeria, a number of studies indicate that it's just around 3.5 to 5% of cases that are reported. So whatever you hear on the news, multiply that by 20 to have an idea of what's really going on. It is an epidemic. It is, from a societal point of view, just like COVID, asymptomatic. What you see is really just the very tip of the iceberg. So when it comes to how should we as a society behave, I think we should find every way to remove the stigma against rapists. The default accusation, which is very unfortunate, the moment somebody has been raped, especially a lady has been raped, the question is then, what did she do? How was she dressed? When armed robbery takes place, we don't put the fault on, well, why were you driving so slowly? Why did you stop? Why were you driving on that road? When armed robbers come to your house, we don't say like, why didn't you have that kind of iron door of the other house? Like, come on. Yes, as Sister Hauwa mentioned, there are many other environmental factors. There's a reason why certain types of dressing are described as provocative dressing. There's a reason why in Abuja, at around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, if you happen to be driving around Maitama area, you see prostitutes dressed in a particular way. When you say it is sexy dressing, what message are you sending? Of course, unfortunately, and I'm saying it's unfortunate because it's not what they wanted, the profession with the highest amount of rape victims is the prostitution area across the world. But coming back to your point, I think there's the need for Muslim scholars to study this subject of rape. I have come across many Muslim scholars, people actively involved in da'wah who are very confused about the subject. I said earlier that in my opinion, and alhamdulillah in the opinion of many scholars who view rape as hiraba, that forensic evidence is admissible, it is acceptable in court. You know, all the judge requires is what convinces him or her. Even if you brought 4 witnesses for a case of zina, you don't tell the judge you must accept the testimony of these 4 witnesses whether you like it or not. If the judge doesn't trust some of them, he throws out the case. If forensics can increase certainty, and this is why, you know, it says al-yaqin la yazulu bi-shak, certainty is not overruled by doubt. These are one of the maxims in Islamic legal philosophy, that whatever can give greater certainty, whatever can show us the truth more clearly. And we pray Allah, وَأَرِنَا الْحَقَّ حَقًّا وَارْزِقْنَا اتِّبَاعَهُ. Show us the truth for what it is. And alhamdulillah, in medicine, we've been able to get science to help us distinguish between typhoid and malaria. We've been able to get science to help us in so many areas on the weather, etc. So I think part of our problem is, as a society, we don't invest in getting our best and brightest to study religion. We complain that the religious scholars are backwards, they are this and that, etc. You know, like they say, a society deserves the leadership it grooms. And if it doesn't groom that leadership, a society deserves the leadership it gets. So just to wrap up on that issue, I think we definitely need to counter the stigmatization of victims. To make it clear, if there's any stigmatization, it should be to the perpetrator. Unfortunately, just like corruption, because many people can get away with it with impunity, the same thing you find applying to rape. And it doesn't help that we don't have enough legal expert in this area. We tolerate so much of sexual harassment. As the sister mentioned, we have become a very sexually charged society. Pornography everywhere in the name of entertainment and music. You're sitting in an airport and, you know, very sexually provocative scenes in the name of dancing, in the name of art, advertising, the instrumentalization of women and the body. So I think we are in a society that unfortunately supports this. However, the rapist is an adult with a choice. He is a criminal. He has choice. He chose not to control when others exercise self-control. He or she is responsible. Yes, they have a diseased heart. They might have had an abused past, but so do many others who don't become rapists. It's about lust. It's about power. It's about abusing the rights of others. Sometimes it is sadistic. Sometimes it is mental. But very often it is the abuse of your choice of free will. So I think it's something we should have no tolerance over, but really look at how to groom more people to handle these type of cases, especially as they go unreported. We need to create more safer environment for victims to feel comfortable opening up, because if they don't open up, then it's difficult to help them. Allahu Alam. Faiz? Okay.
This is true. Thank you very much, Sheikh.
All right.
Hajiya Fatimah, a question for you. You mentioned earlier regarding the issue of conditioning. Research suggests that parents talk more frequently with their daughters than with their sons regarding issues of rape or sexual violence or sexuality in general. Do you find this to be problematic?
Yes, to be honest with you, like I earlier said, parents do not know how to have conversations with their children. And if at all any conversation is happening, it is with the girls. It's easier because usually what happens is the male parents leave the tarbiyah and the talking to the female parents. So, and if there's talking happening, it's usually between mother and daughter. But hardly do you find, because usually what I hear is parents find it very, very difficult to talk to their sons, especially if they're older, you know, so what do I say? How do I say it, you know? So in my school, when the kids go up to primary 6, when they approach in primary 5, approaching primary 6, before they leave the school, my school is a primary school, what we do is we have this, what we call primary 6 camp. And in this camp, we try to sit down with the children, and then the girls and the boys are separated, and we teach them about their bodies, what to expect, the changes that they're seeing, and stuff like that. And then we also have these conversations with them. We try to open up. There's something we call the key person. So teachers are key people. So each teacher is assigned a child or children that when there's a problem or they need to talk to somebody in school, they can go up to that teacher and talk to them. And so it's all opening up the way to have discussions with them, with children. Now, there's also something that we call, so depending on the age group, if the younger they are, we need to vary the language. So we teach them what we call safe bad touch. Bad touch really essentially is about telling them where their private areas are. Now, when the kids are young, you have to vary the language. You have to be very careful what language you use. So bad touch is about, where are those private areas? So you have the chest, you have in between the legs, and you have the bottom, so, and we tell them like, look, so when this happens, nobody's allowed to touch there. There are exceptions. Sometimes the doctor, when the doctor needs to examine you, he can touch certain areas, and only in the presence of your parents. This is what we tell them. And sometimes when your parents are bathing you, they can touch those areas. But aside from that, nobody's allowed to tamper with those areas or to touch in any way. Now, when that happens, we teach them, So what you need to do is, the first thing you do when they touch that area, you scream as loud as you can. Scream and run away. Then you find a safe adult. Now, before we do this, we ask them, who do you think a safe adult is? So they will tell you who their safe adult is. And then we write it down and we communicate to these safe adults to say, so and so child has chosen you as the safe person. So when she comes or when he comes to you to say, my private area has been touched by so and so, please believe him and listen to him, and so things like that. And then with older children, we want to teach parents, especially I advise strongly that parents partner with schools. Honestly, we have to be on the same page to work together, because for most part of the day, you give us your children in trust. And then when they go back to you. So we're two parents on the block. So you need to come together, put hands together and do the same thing so that we're on the same page and the child is not confused. So for older children, I advise that parents learn how to have very, very difficult conversations. And always, I want the fathers to be here. Honestly, I want them to partner with their with the mothers. They are in this together. That child was given to both the father and the mother, and Allah is going to question you. Allah will question the two of you. How did you parent them? How did you train them? What kind of tarbiyah did you give them? So it is not right for fathers to leave the tarbiyah to their mothers. And as soon as something goes wrong, it is her. She has done something wrong. It's something she did. I did times without number in my school. When there's a disciplinary case, I insist that the two parents come in. Sometimes, yes, I accept that the father is very busy, he's not around. But I say, when you're free, please make the time. And that is when I would like to see you. I will make the time, because I respect the fact that sometimes fathers are not in the same town as their family, So when they come in and we're having the discussion, and many times you hear, it is her. And I have to play that part of being a counselor to say, to talk to him and say, look, this is not fair. You are the leader in that home. You are the leader. So you need to guide her. If she's doing something wrong, you need to know and correct her and teach her and work together with her and bring her up, to what level you want. And then also parents need to, educate themselves. We all need to educate ourselves, both mothers and fathers. These children are way ahead. They know more than you know. They know. Sometimes when you're even having that conversation, you hear them say, oh, mommy, I know where you're heading. Or when you're, finding it very difficult and struggling with certain words, the first thing that comes out is, I know what you're trying to say. And then they blurt out the word, So we have to learn how to have very, very difficult conversations with the children. What you want is the children come to you first. You don't want them going to anybody. Older ones, you don't want them going to their friends. If they come across any information, you want them to come to you, you teach them. So you have no option but to know. You have to go and know more, educate yourselves. Then the younger ones, you want to build trust. Talking a lot with children builds trust between you and your child. And today we don't have that. Honestly, we don't have that. Two separated parents are on one side and children are on the other side. And you have left the internet, you have left friends training your children. And this is not acceptable. So we need to get up. So we've started doing some of that awareness raising, teaching parents how to have hard conversations. I've had a session already on that, and inshallah is something I intend continuing to do, So all of us need to get up and do, inshallah. So, yeah. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Can you hear me? Guys?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
All right. Yeah. So have I answered
All
your
right.
question?
Thank you very much. Dr. Hauwa? Yes, you have. Thank you. Dr. Hauwa, in what ways can the average person offer support to a victim? What would be the things to avoid saying or doing?
Okay, alhamdulillah. Let me start from the point of, I read one comment by someone and I noticed that Sheikh Lemu was already addressing that when I came back in, and that's the fact that one of the things we must not do is to victimize the victim. Unfortunately, that is what people tend to do. Whatever has happened, we shouldn't blame the victim again. I love the example Sheikh gave. When someone's car is stolen, for example, do we say, why were you driving so slowly, or why were you driving on that particular street? It's the person's property, it's not your property. Even if the person leaves it, dangling on the road, it's not your property. So you leave the person's property for the person. So regardless of whatever the circumstances are around that particular situation, the first thing is not to blame the victim. And let me also say that most times the victims are already blaming themselves. In fact, they are so guilty, they so guilt trip themselves far above what you would ever tell them. They begin to tell themselves, why did I even go there in the first place? Why? All these things you think you are telling them, they're already telling themselves. So now hearing it from you is like extra validation that actually could push the person into a mental health situation. And then another thing that also happens is when you continue to guilt trip this person, you are also going to encourage the person to become an abuser. Because they would then say that, okay, if I was abused because this happened, then I will also abuse anybody that has, this kind of characteristics. And I don't think we want that to continue. So even if the person has done something we believe is wrong, by not dressing well, by doing what, that should not be the first thing to do. The first thing to do is to first take the person for medical attention. First thing first. Whoever is around there and is educated should say, first thing first, take this person to the clinic. This is because you need to quickly check the person for infections. You need to also check if you want to go out and go all out to prosecute what is happening. You need that first 24 hours to get evidence. So the person needs to be taken to the hospital. To prevent HIV infection, for example, there's what we call, there's a prophylactic that can be taken. That is post-exposure prophylaxis that is being given. So when this person, and this can only work if it is given between 24 to 48 hours after exposure. So when this person is taken to the hospital, the doctor would quickly check, then begin the treatment for this person just in case. Because even if they do an HIV testing at that particular day, they will not get a positive or a negative result because HIV antibodies do not develop until days after exposure. So even if they test, they won't get anything. So they will have to say, you have to come back in 3 months' time for another test, and then in 6 months' time for another test, depending on the kind of test that was being done. So if you don't take the person to the hospital in 24 hours, you are already reducing the chances of getting good evidence and also exposing the person to infection. So that's the first thing. Take this person to a hospital where things like this are being checked. Then report the case to appropriate authority. Before this is also done, if we can get maybe a psychologist or a counselor or somebody that is trained in this area to come and also do their own part. There is a lot of things that goes in, there is techniques on how to go so that you put the person in a stable condition, because at that time, they are usually not stable. So you want to put the person in a stable condition, in a stable frame of mind, while the person is undergoing the check, because even during the check, there are some things to say before the check and after the check. Now, another thing is, please, whatever you do, don't do anything that is serving as you imposing anything on that person, because the person has just lost his or her trust in the world, and they wouldn't want you to come and, you know, add that distrust. So whatever is going to be happening to the person, you let them know ahead of time. Okay, so if they're going to be if they're taken to the hospital, let them know that, okay, you know, with what has happened, we are going to go to the hospital, and these and these and these and these are the things that will happen in the hospital. You don't just take them to the hospital just like, and they just find themselves in the hospital. If you are going to be reporting to the police, you also have to inform them and let them be in the know, and let them accept to go to the police. If they refuse to go, it's either you find a way to cajole them, or like I said, you bring in a psychologist who would do our own part to make sure that the person understands and knows the reason why they need to go to report and why all this process is necessary. Because if you don't do that and you force your opinion on them, you are also going to make it worse. The psychological issue will become worse. Remember I talked about PTSD? You are going to make the trauma far more than the initial assault. And that's what happens for most people. So we don't want that to happen. So we do the talking, the initial counseling. You take the person to the hospital, you report to appropriate authorities, then you come up with a plan of what to do along with the person. Whatever plan is going to be concluded, the person has to accept to this conclusion. Now, what if the person was a small child? Most times when children come to report to their parent that somebody has done something, most parents do not believe. And unfortunately, for a child to come, it's massive. I'm sure Hajiya Fatimah knows that. It's massive for a child to actually come and tell you this has happened. A child would not lie about that. A child would, what would make them lie that somebody has done such a thing to them? A child. Children won't lie. But unfortunately, most of what we have seen, a lot of cases that I have attended to, even when they told their parent either said it's not true, or unfortunately, their parents said, you caused it upon yourself. How would a child cause that upon his or herself? I've heard, you know, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Or he's a family, we have to keep it hush hush. And then they destroy the lives of these children forever. Because the damage is now even more than the initial damage of the assault, is not even the fact that they are not trusted, they've not been believed and all that. So if a child comes to a parent to say this has happened, don't deny, don't say the child has lied. At the same time, don't shout and scream. Because when you shout and scream, you're also going to be doing more harm. Rather, what you want to do is you validate the child. Tell the child that you appreciate the fact that the child has come to tell you, and then allow the child to tell you the full story. Don't lead them on, but encourage them to say, okay, and then what happened? It's very difficult. Like I said, I know it's not easy. The tendency is to want to scream and run to the person and do all sorts. However, we need to begin to engage parents and begin to prepare their minds, because we know that 1 out of 4, every child, you know, has been exposed to sexual assault before the age of 12. And then we are beginning to see that even in adults, the numbers are something else. We don't have good data for Nigeria, but all over the world, this is what WHO is saying. So there is a likelihood that something like this could happen to a loved one, and we need to begin to tell ourselves the truth. When this happened, what should we do? You know, validate the child, tell the child that you believe the child, understand the magnitude of what has happened, explain to the child, you know, that this is what will happen. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this, and then let the child accept that these things will be done. And also let the child know that it is not their fault, no matter what you think. You have to convince the child that it is not their fault, because what happens is immediately you make it look like it's their fault, they don't trust the world again. They don't trust people again. And then it's one of two things. It's either they go into their shell and never come out of it, or they go all wild, and you see them become, oh, you know, you don't even want to hear. They become prostitutes, they become abusers, they become. It's one of the two. So we don't want to put them in that state. We want to put them in a state wherein they should still know that there are some people that they can trust and there are some people that they can believe while we begin the process. And I also want to say that we should not take this single-handedly. Rather, we should bring in professionals, bring in psychologists, bring in counselors. Now we have a lot of helplines. Pick up, call the helpline and let them tell you what to do. Because sometimes at that point too, you may be so confused, you don't even know what to do. All the things you've been told, you may, forget. Or immediately just call the helpline, and then, they would tell you, okay, this is what to do next. This is what to do next. This is what to do next. Inshallah, may Allah make it easy for all of us and protect us from such magnitude of trauma.
Ameen ya Rabbi. Yeah, Sheikh, another question for you. Can a person who engages in sexual violence expect forgiveness in this life without atoning for their sins? Hello, ya Sheikh. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Forgiveness is entirely in the hands of Allah. What we are taught in the Quran, Allah says in one ayah, Ya ibadi alladhina asrafu ala anfusihim la taqnatu min rahmatillah inna Allaha yaghfiru dhunuba jami'an innahu huwal ghafurur rahim. Allah says, O my servants who have transgressed against their own selves, now those who have gone far in the worst of sinning. And he actually addresses such people, not all sinners. No, he says, Ya ibadi, O my servants. It's a loving word that Allah uses for people who sincerely want to repent. And he says, La taqnatu min rahmatillah. Never despair of Allah's mercy. Don't give up on Allah's compassion. There is no sin that is greater than Allah's rahmah. There is nothing you can do that is so big that if Allah wants to forgive you, He can't. Allah forgives whatever He wants, if you have met the conditions. And this is where the other part of your question. If the person does not want to atone, part of the criteria for forgiveness, if you steal property and you sincere that you regret, you repent, you are reforming, is restitution, is give it back. If you slap somebody, you don't just slap somebody, go in a corner, I've done istighfar however many times, I'm very sincere. It is insincere if you are not concerned about the victim. And so when it comes to what we call the fiqh side, seeking restitution, apologizing to the victim is a condition that we as humans will continue to insist. How will Allah handle it on the day of judgment is up to Allah. So I don't think any scholar would tell you, well, if you are sincere, even if you don't do it, inshallah, Allah will help you. We will not want to open that door. We do know of the hadith in Bukhari of the person who killed 99 people. I mean, this guy was serial killer. And finally, he killed number 100. But because of sincerity that Allah saw in his heart, Allah forgave him. So we know Allah is forgiving, but from what we also know, Allah's forgiveness also comes with certain conditions, but it is up to him to change his own conditions. But what we are aware of is if you have done something wrong to somebody, you have taken somebody's right, you must restitute, you must pay back, you must refund, you must get the apology to that person and get that person to forgive you. And so I think it would be actually, it's important for the person who did it to look at it as a potential way of healing the victim. That the trauma that the victim is going through it is helped if you, the perpetrator, can actually come and let them know, I did it, I'm sorry. And the fact that you came knowing, they may decide, I will report you to the police. So be it. You did it. And you take full responsibility. If your iman is not strong enough, then Allah will handle you the way He handles whoever. He is the one who judges hearts. So there's the territory we can't go into. Allah decides who and what He forgives. But from what we know, you must find every energy, every way, whether indirectly communicating until you can get people to advise you on how to approach the victim, but try and get an apology before they die or before you die. Wallahu alam.
All right, thank you, ya Sheikh. Hajiya Fatimah, we have a question for you from one of the audience. They're asking, why is it that you feel that parents are reluctant to take up any cases when their children come forth with them with an accusation of sexual abuse?
Simply put, honestly, shame. Shame.
No.
Parents see from there that it's about them, that it's about shaming. They don't want anybody to know that this has happened to their child. And years down the road, maybe when the child, if it's a female, well, usually it's a female, when she comes to get married, somebody somewhere will know and the husband will not want to marry her, and so many other issues. So really, it's about shame. Parents are ashamed. And honestly, this is not about you, the parents, it's about your child's future. You are the one that has been given that responsibility, to take care of your child. The children belong to Allah, but given to you as an amana, as a trust. So who is the best person to look after them, to protect them, to guide them, to protect them? That is your number one priority. So when you're out of the home and you leave somebody in the hands of somebody who you don't know their background, you don't know what they're doing with your child. We all hear cases today on the news about how house helps are molesting children. Then you come back and this happens, and then you don't want to hear this. Whereas you left the place open. You put them in the predator's way. You opened up, you made your home not safe. So how can you put it aside? It is your responsibility. Your honesty is our shame. But Allah is going to ask you, what did you do? What did you do to take care of my servant? The child that I gave you in amana, in trust. So really, I think most of the time is about shame. You don't know. I have also seen a case where, like somebody said, and I think it was we were discussing with other school owners, and what she said was, she had one of the cases, and the parent was very angry, and it turned out to be that it was something in her past, that she couldn't handle, and so she passed it on to the child. She was very angry at the child. So anything the child does, anytime I say, or that school owner calls the parent, she's afraid. She's afraid. She doesn't want to come, and she's asking. And times that I've called fathers, and on the phone they're like, no, I don't want to come. No, I don't want to come. Or they keep putting it off. They just don't want to come. They don't want to hear. How is it that you don't want to hear? Who am I going to tell? Who am I going to partner with? And like Hajiya said, I think it's not the children's fault. It's not their fault. But by that action, you're saying that it is their fault. Recently, I heard, I think it was a child that was molested, a 2-year or 3-year-old child on the news or in the newspapers. And that child was in the custody of the grandmother. And when that child was molested, the first thing the grandmother said to her, can you imagine that she's a shell? A 3-year-old child, that she's a shell. For goodness sake. What has a 3-year-old child? How, they don't even know what hit them. They don't know. They just know that they went through pain until as they're growing up, that stigma will continue to follow them. This is somebody who's supposed to be taking care of her, whom she's supposed to trust. The only go-to person in her life, and she's calling her a shell because of something that was done to her. So like Sheikh Lemu said, unless we're able to turn it around, that the stigma is for the perpetrator, not the victim. honestly, so we have to find a way of getting the parents to really understand that stand up for your children. I mean, do we even need to tell you that you're supposed to stand up for your child? Do we need to say that? We don't need to. So this is something I do all the time. I try to sit and discuss with the parents that, look, this child doesn't know anything. Children do not know, you know? So somebody is asking a show, somebody's asking. A show is somebody who's promiscuous, a 3-year-old being promiscuous. So all the time when I get the opportunity, or when we have the discussion with other school owners, I say, please, when you get the opportunity, sit with these parents. I get them to understand that when things happen to children, it's not their fault. They're innocent. They're innocent, but society happens to them. Bad things happen to them, and we are the ones responsible for protecting them. So most of the time, this is what it is. It's usually something that has happened in your life, and you don't want any shame to come to the family, most of the time. This is very sad.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Sheikh, one question for you from the audience. Is Islam opposed to public disgrace of an accused rapist?
Assalamu alaikum. I think once we have categorized a crime correctly, if you still insist a crime is zina, then it is something that is not to be publicized. If, however, it is hiraba, it is a crime like armed robbery, it's a crime like terrorism, why should we not publicize something that is wrong if it would help deter others and would contribute towards justice taking its place? I think the problem is the question of people abusing. I know the Me Too movement, for example, has used expression, if somebody is a victim, speak about it and let it be pushed and let it be supported. You know, as the Hajiya Fatimah mentioned, and we see this even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and I think Dr. Hauwa alluded to this, when somebody comes and says, I've been raped, you can't start with the assumption they must be lying. It is so difficult to make that type of statement. You know the risks you are taking. And so it is most likely true. And this is what we have found. But it didn't just stop there. Once a rape perpetrator, a victim, has been identified, that is usually when others come to say, he raped me too, he abused me too. In other words, and a lot of studies have found that most rapists are not first-time offenders. So we would want to encourage, if it does happen, speak up, let others know, because then others feel comfortable coming and saying, this is what happened. Of course, there's a risk here. The risk is people who spoil the name of others. But I think that is less common. And every system of justice will have to take risks. If you say, don't speak until you have all the evidence, then you will most likely die in silence. What we have seen is just the knowledge that people are speaking. While it has disadvantage, I'm not saying it can't be abused, it's not a big legal loophole, it is there. But it will most likely not be taken advantage of as much as, in other words, the benefits are greater than the harm. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, a woman came and told the Prophet ﷺ, my husband beat me. The Prophet ﷺ said, go and beat him back. And then a verse came to the Prophet ﷺ telling him, no, that is not the best way. And then there was a step-by-step approach on how to handle domestic violence. What we find is, on a number of occasions, when domestic violence took place, the Prophet did not ask for supporting evidence for the wife. It was the assumption that the wife is not going to come and say, my husband has abused me just to spoil it, his name. It's not impossible, but it's the rare occurrence. And Sharia judgments are not based on rare occurrence, they are based on what's the norm, what's the overriding benefit in that regard. If you would permit me, excuse me, on this issue of girls being raped, especially children, which we find so disgusting but seems to be common in society. One of the problems we have is this not agreeing on an age of consent, not agreeing on what is the minimum age for marriage. And this is a problem in some Muslim countries, not in others. In some Muslim countries, the scholars have sat, discussed this issue. There are many issues the Prophet ﷺ did not put an age limit for. Not a minimum age, not a maximum age. There was no maximum age for professions. Today we have maximum age for being a surgeon. We have a maximum age for being a pilot. Why? Because of what is called maslaha, public interest. You will create problems for society if you do not put a maximum age for being a pilot. But we don't have a minimum age for riding a camel. We don't have a minimum age in the Quran and Sunnah for riding a horse. We don't have a minimum age for holding a weapon. We don't have a minimum age for holding certain offices. And so when we look at it, there are so many laws in Sharia that are the product of what is called saddu zaria. You prohibit things that are permissible because they lead to a greater harm or a harm that they were not causing before. So we all agree we should stop at the red light. Why? Maslaha, public interest. And if you don't respect that, you will cause accidents. It will cause harm. But we seem to have no problem having a minimum age for riding a motorcycle. We have a minimum age for driving a car. We have a minimum age for certification for various things. We have minimum age before we can give you the 10 million or 100 million naira inheritance you got from your dad. You don't give it to somebody just because he has reached the age of maturity. Even the Quran says they reach an age of rushda, an age of discernment. What is that age of discernment? Some societies would put 16, some would put 18, some would go higher. But where you do not have an age at all, you open the door so wide for statutory rape, where you say the girl accepted your money and you had sexual intercourse with her. You are whereas you know her mother would not have accepted that. An adult lady would not have accepted that. And so what we find in many cases, and the example that Sister Fatima was giving of a girl she met with a gentleman sitting down, where you find a girl who is hawking. She is below the age where anybody would say she can make mature decisions, responsible decisions. And yet you feel by giving her some money and she accepts, and somebody goes and sleeps with her, he doesn't consider that rape. That is rape, because you will not consider that as legally acceptable, even if you said it was a transaction. And so I think on the side of many of our ulama, the need for the government, because the cost of getting ulama from other countries to come and sit with our own, to debate these things thoroughly. And it's not, you don't need to go far. Go to Morocco. We respect a lot of scholars in Morocco. We respect a lot of scholars in Tunisia, Algeria, and these areas, Malaysia. Get scholars who can sit with scholars. The moment you have new issues in our society, you will have to do what is called ijtihad. Ijtihad means juristic reasoning, where you are most likely going to come up with a new fatwa that was not done before. It's like coming up with new medicine that was not prescribed before. It is ludicrous to expect that a new fatwa should be backed by the majority opinion of scholars of the past, when the majority of scholars of the past were not there to see your own new context. It's like expecting that we will only take medicine for a new illness if the scholars and medical personnel of the past couple of centuries agree. We will never progress if we carry on with that mindset. So the moment you need ijtihad, the moment you have a new issue, you need ijtihad. The moment you need ijtihad, you need scholars who have been trained in usulul fiqh, qawaid al-fiqhiyah, maqasid sharia. And I want to say this, and I say this in all sincerity. Wallahi, as an ummah, we can't be waiting for our scholars, not the young generation. Things are changing so rapidly. Many of our scholars were completely silent during the COVID period. If you are saying you want a useful, relevant fatwa, we got into the issue of movement of al-Majaris. A lot of our scholars were silent there too. We come into rape. A lot of our scholars are silent.
Yeah.
Scholarship in this area, I am not saying there isn't a lot of reading to do. Like in every field, whether it's medicine, whether it's engineering, there's big fat books you need to read. But they are human written books and they can be studied by anybody who really cares. I studied agriculture for my first degree. I didn't do Islamic studies, not even in secondary school. I had to drop it to take physics in order to move into the sciences in Federal Government College in those days. I did my master's in resource management. But by the side, alhamdulillah, with parents, with scholars, you learn some of these things by the side and you begin to understand them. And yes, you don't consider yourself a scholar. You will still consult. But at the end of the day, it is, you know, we don't have a clergy in Islam, at least not in Sunni Islam. We don't have one group of people. These are the only ones who speak on religion. No, it is survival of the fittest, survival of the most knowledgeable. The madhabs that have survived have been the ones that have presented the best arguments and whose students were able to defend their positions. I'd like to encourage everybody on this subject of rape, please read broadly. Read broadly. It's not, I mean, alhamdulillah, there are books on sexual violations in Islamic law, well-researched material by many scholars. In 2 weekends, you can read nearly everything there is to read on the issue of rape. I'm not saying that's always enough, but at least it takes you away from being a dabbler and amateur to somebody who at least you have an idea of what you're speaking about. Because we have to be able also to bring some of our scholars who are speaking outside their field of specialization. You find a scholar in one field dabbling into an area that is not his specialization. And when you ask them, please, what books, what scholars have you read that have tackled this particular issue? They tell you none. And so, you know, I just want to encourage, let's read more on this subject area. You know, Sharia has a lot of flexibility, adaptation. It's adapted for centuries. It's just getting stagnant now that we don't have our best and brightest. And I wish we could have more studying this religion. May Allah make it easy for us. Allahu alam.
Thank you very much. Hajiya Hauwa, I have a question for you from the audience.
Okay.
They're asking, from an ethical standpoint, are you obligated to report an instance of rape if someone was to confide in you?
Okay. For in the law in Nigeria, no. I don't know of any law that makes it binding upon me to report as a psychologist. However, I can encourage and make sure that, you know, I use whatever I can to let the person report him or herself. The reason why it's not ethical in the first place to even do that, aside from the fact that it's not in the law, is because the consequences of the reporting is going to be on the victim. The consequences are not mine to take, because there's a whole lot of things that go into reporting. When you report, and that's why, aside from shame, like Hajiya Fatimah mentioned, the second thing is stigma. And the third thing is the fact that these people are re-traumatized. So let me give you an example. If somebody decides to report and the case goes to court, the person will have to relate the story again from the beginning to the end in the public. So it's like the child or the person is being re-traumatized again. And then most people will tell you, I can't go through that process. I can't relate in the public, in the courts. And so like one person noted when I was reading here, they are threatened, they are blackmailed, they are, all sorts of things are done to them so that they just keep quiet. For someone to actually go and talk outside and be a reporter for themselves is huge. So you can't go ahead and say, I want to report. Okay, where's the person that you are reporting about? Is she going to stand on the stand and say this was what was done to her? Will she be willing to go to the hospital to get all the reports done? A whole lot of things goes into this. So an individual like outside the family cannot just say that, I'll go ahead and report. However, there's a difference if the person is a child. Maybe the person didn't tell me, but I saw that a helpless child was actually raped and nobody who can stand for that child. Then it is our responsibility to make sure that we go all out for that particular child. But for an adult, the person has to take the responsibility to want to report on their own because they will be the one to go through all the consequences at the end of the day.
All right, thank you very much. Unfortunately, it seems that we've come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists very much for their time and their contributions today. Please remember that tomorrow we will be holding the second part of this session with our distinguished guest, Sheikh Pantami, the Honorable Minister for Communication, a legal expert on the matter of gender-based violence, and also Hajiya Sa'adatu Mahdi, the
Program moderator has disappeared.
Yes, disappeared.
We'll wait for him a bit.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum
Salam.
Unfortunately, it seems that we've lost our moderator, but as he was saying, we'll be having another panel discussion tomorrow, inshallah. We'll be having the Honorable Minister, Sheikh Pantami, a legal expert. They'll also tell us the way to go about the prosecution, a successful prosecution of rape, and we'll be joined with Hajiya Sa'adatu Mahdi, who is the Secretary General of RAPA, and she'll be telling us how to go about successfully advocating. So thank you again for joining us. Hello? Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay. And I think that'll be the end for the session today. Thank you all for joining us, and assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum
Nurudeen. Assalamu alaikum, Hajiya.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan.
Wa iyyakum. All the best.
Thank you very much.